my pleasure will be to introduce to you Geoff Dyer, who so briefly introduced himself, writer. When we were thinking of putting this together, and we sat down and we began to sort of go through some of the areas that might be interesting, and you have been sent, I believe, a really fascinating article from the New Yorker, and you've also got a couple of pieces from Writing in Education, which I think is a very sort of passionate, slightly despairing, but brilliantly articulate piece by Andrew about the various aspects of creative writing. And when I was looking around for various interesting quotations, and there was the one which I think came from Randall Jarrell, where he says here, this is not by Randall Jarrell. You know, he wrote this book called Pictures from an Institution, which is a kind of satirical view of one of the early campus. It's not exactly a novel, it's a sort of series of 10 pictures. And there's a review here from 1954, and an interview with him. Mr. Jarrell, it says, is 40 and currently teaches at the Women's College of the University of North Carolina. His courses there include modern poetry and imaginative writing, the latter so named because, quote, I can't stand the phrase creative writing. And in this book he presents pen portraits of various people who are teaching there. Be interested to see what sort of areas that we cover. I'm only in for the first half of this. I'm interested, obviously, as we might all be, in such a concept as can writing be taught. It is one of the things that has chiefly preoccupied people. It might be interesting to consider it in relationship to other arts, whether other arts can be taught. And if other arts can be taught, how far can this be taught? What does it mean to be teaching it? What are the differences between the arts that might actually determine this kind of teaching? In what way writing enters into societies, into institutions, into gatherings of people? How writers have got to know each other's work, discuss each other's work? Whether there are particular cultures in which it is accepted that there would be collections of people within or without institutions who might discuss each other's work, and what happens when writers actually enter the institutions, which is the chief sort of focus of today's. Just a last little thing from, perhaps a very personal thing for me. I didn't go to university at all, I went to art school. When I was at art school, there were two poets who were teaching at this art school, both dead now. One was Martin Bell, and on a Wednesday afternoon he used to come in and just ran this little so-called class in which I dedicatedly went all the time. It was my first real contact with a published writer. And it was the beginnings, I suppose. I'm talking about 1969, 1970, so it's a long time ago. And Martin would sit us around the table, sometimes 7 of us, sometimes 12 of us, sometimes just 2 of us. And he'd bring in bits of writing, we'd talk about those bits of writing. And sometimes then we'd talk about the stuff that we'd written. And it was a kind of, it was a creative writing workshop in germ. And I found it extraordinarily valuable. I was completely ignorant. He brought me various texts which I should read, and I did read, introduced me to sort of people. I'd read quite a bit, but some of the mainstream stuff I hadn't at all. So he introduced me to Wallace Stevens and to, good heavens, Philip Larkin. I hadn't read any Philip Larkin in 1969. And when I left, then he gave me a letter of introduction to another poet in London, Peter Porter, who then acted as a kind of mentor. And I found this kind of contact when I was a developing writer extraordinarily valuable. The notion that it should have developed as it has done since, so it has become a branch of heavy industry almost, especially in sort of recent years, is something different, but that was a germ of it. So I found it personally very valuable, and of course with my colleague Andrea I taught it for a number of years at undergraduate level at the art school. For about 12, 13 years, and that was a very enjoyable time before moving here. That was my personal background. The best thing I could do is pass on over to Geoff, our provocateur, to provoke. Geoff Dyer.
Thank you.
Please take the microphone. We should pass the microphone between us.
Yeah. How does that, is that okay volume-wise? Great, thank you, George. So obviously at the end of the week, somebody is going to have to try to tie up the various things that have been said and try to coax them into some kind of summing up or overview. The great advantage of going first, it seems to me, is that actually the opposite way of proceeding is probably the most fruitful. So what you'll get here is a kind of scattergun approach, not a thesis but a number of ideas, probably contradictory ones, some of which you'll probably want to discard instantly, others which you might want to expand upon, refine or refute in the course of the next days. I think most people from Britain, when they go to America, they're aware of this lovely kind of instant feeling that you get in America, which is, to sum it up, it's like this. Okay, the answer's yes. Now, what's the question? And of course, here on our little island, the opposite tends to be the case. Yeah, the answer here tends to be no, and the question we're addressing here is about creative writing, and I feel at some level something in our English soul or guts predisposes us to say, no, writing can't be taught. But even if one instinctively wants to say that, partly I suspect out of a romantic desire to keep the act of creation secret, some residual adherence to Keats's idea that if poetry comes not as naturally as leaves to the trees, it had better not come at all. Even if one wants to say that, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that it can be taught, that those leaves can, at the very least, be encouraged to emerge. The problem, or at least the complicating factor in all of this, is that the bulk of that evidence has come from America. Even in America, even some of the least likely, the most outsiderish, blue-collar type writers, even the baddest badasses and the most out-there outlaws, it turns out they've gone through some kind of formalized mentoring program. The apparent proximity to a kind of authentic illiteracy, the kind of stuff that one associates with those stories by Tom Jones, let's say, that turns out to have been very diligently worked over and encouraged by writing programs. You might find the next suggestion a bit contentious, but if we accept that for much of the second half of the 20th century, it was America rather than Britain that made the running in imaginative writing, then part of the explanation as to why that occurs might have to do with the institutionalization of creative writing that we got in America. The alternative is, in a sense, too terrible to contemplate. The alternative, I guess, is to think, well, maybe America is inherently more interesting than Britain, or that maybe American English is somehow more conducive to certain kinds of imaginative writing. Certainly, I'm struck by something about American first novels, something that not even the most fated first novel of recent years from Britain, Zadie Smith's White Teeth, had. A kind of swaggering confidence. I mean, I felt it so strongly with the recent books by Wells Tower and Josh Ferris. There's that kind of incredible swinging open of the saloon doors, and the new gunslinger in town says, "Here I am." And that confidence, and of course I'm talking about the book's confidence, not anything about the authors personally. It seems to me that is a product both of America generally and of the culture of the writing program particularly.